Canvas.org, and I'm here to talk to you guys about the Canvas API. So I tend to like to get a little bit meta with some of the stuff I'm talking about. So as a result of that, I've foolishly decided to write all my slides using the Canvas API directly. So these are my slides. Okay, so just to talk a bit about it, about the format. So yeah, so they're written only using the Canvas API. This is kind of a self-challenge, but also, oh no, I'm not recording my slides. Wait, one sec. I'm sorry. Wait. Screen recording. Record.
Click.
There. Okay.
You gotta click.
Oh yeah. No, I did.
Yeah, that's right.
That's good. Okay. Back to the start. Hello, everybody. Welcome to no, I'm just joking. Okay. So yeah, so I've written all my slides using the Canvas API only, partially because I hate myself, but also I kind of wanted it to be a demonstration of things I'm talking about and show that you can actually use this API exclusively, and it can actually do kind of interesting things. So this app has a single activity, which is kind of the window on which I use the Canvas. But apart from that, there's no views, there's no fragments, no libraries, nothing like that. Yeah, which I've written there. And you can look at the source code itself if you're interested. It's at Ader Canvas Talk, GitHub. So yeah, why don't we just get to it? So where does Canvas kind of fall in the graphics API framework? Typically, when you set up an app, you have a bunch of layouts, maybe some drawable resources. Those are all fine and good, but to actually get those to draw something on the screen, the Android system parses them, and that results in a bunch of views, kind of layouts, and drawable resources. But then, how do these actually draw anything? And they all use the Canvas API. Every single view in Android has a onDraw method, and the onDraw method is what is called when a view wants to render itself onto the screen. And then Canvas finally talks to a library, a C++ library under the hood called Skia, which basically translates all these commands into OpenGL commands. So the reason I'm focusing on Canvas is, for me, it's kind of the productivity sweet spot. You get a lot of the drawing primitives that you typically get with the lower level drawing API, but you don't have to do like the black magic that's usually involved with OpenGL. And you're still in Java land, so it's still fairly compatible with the rest of Android stuff. Okay, so the basics. So if you need you need an instance of Canvas to actually do anything with Canvas. And to do this, you want to subclass subclass view with a custom view, and override the onDraw method. This is called whenever the view needs to render itself. And once that's called, you can then draw onto the screen however you like. Canvas has a ton of methods, methods of the pattern of draw, and then some shape name usually. So, you have like draw line, draw rect, draw circle. The initial parameters are always kind of a description of the geometry, and then you also pass in a paint object. And paint kind of takes in the typical things you'd expect. It takes in color and style, like path style, but it can also take in more advanced stuff as well, like shaders and color filters, and you can do a lot of kind of crazy stuff with that. Actually, fonts and typefaces as well. So here's my simple little view that just draws a rectangle, circle, and line, and it looks something like this. That's all good and fun, but not too many apps are composed exclusively of squares and circles and lines. So that brings us to our next slide, which is the actual useful methods of Canvas. And if you ever want to start doing anything slightly more complex, you're probably going to want to use the draw path. Draw path takes in an instance of path and again a paint. And what path allows you to do is chain together two-dimensional coordinates to build out more complex geometries. And you can chain them together with lines or arcs or lots of kind of interesting geometries. And this is, even though you can't see this code, sorry, it's a bit small, but this is actually code from this slideshow itself, which describes the arrows which were in a previous slide. So that draw fits. So you can pretty easily, and it wasn't a ton of code, you can pretty easily build up more complicated shapes, and it's a lot more memory efficient than having a bitmap. So that's really nice. Draw arc is also kind of a fun one that I like to use a lot. It's typically just like define bounds and the start and end angle. It's usually not something I use every day, but you can, for pie charts, it's like super useful. Also, the Android loaders typically use this method a lot. That's kind of how you get the spinning, rotating effect on the Android loaders. And then finally, rounded rectangle is nothing exceptional, but it's so common in material design. I feel like it does need kind of a call out. It's great for like buttons and just like kind of backgrounds of views and whatnot. And then finally, one of my favorites actually is draw text, which is so useful, in my opinion, that I'd actually say it needs its own slide. So drawing text can be done with the expected draw text command. You pass in an instance of the string and a paint object in which you define your font and your text size, and you get something like this. Nothing too crazy, but and basically also what a text view does. But the truly useful nature of it comes when you use it combined with getTextBounds. And getTextBounds, you pass it an instance of a string, and you also pass in a rectangle. And what it'll do is it'll populate that rectangle with the smallest possible dimensions that text can fit into. So this is actually really useful if you ever have like a really tight design and you need the exact amount of space. You need to know the exact space your text takes up. This is really good. And even more useful actually is that call will also return the ascent and descent of your text. And based on that, you can figure out what the baseline of your text is. So then you can either align at the top of the text or at the bottom, or along the baseline too. So if you have a really kind of anal designer, this is something you often want to use because it gives you a lot more control over the layout of your text. And you can get font metrics as well, which is what text views usually use. And this will just give you the maximum and minimum values of your font. So if you want to lay out font, or if you want to lay out text and you want to be absolutely certain that whatever text you put into that is going to fit in the given space, that font metrics is actually an incredibly useful method that's on the paint object. Okay, and then there's bitmaps. If you get kind of tired of making a bunch of commands one after another to draw complex shapes, you usually want to rely on your designer to draw you something up quick, and then you embed it in your app as a bitmap. So that can be done with the draw bitmap method. It's, again, kind of what you'd expect. You pass in an instance of a bitmap and a matrix which defines the way that bitmap is transformed, the scale, translation, rotation, stuff like that. And you get something like this. Not too bad. But you can actually do much more interesting things when you use shaders with this bitmap. So you can actually use that same bitmap and put it in a bitmap shader. So you put the bitmap in the shader, attach the shader to your paint instance, and then you pass the paint instance into any canvas draw shape method that you want. And what that does is it effectively treats the color of the paint as if it were the bitmap you pass it. And this is really useful because this is basically the underlying principle on which the rounded image view or the circular image view libraries work. It's a very efficient way to crop images without actually having to modify the bitmaps. So it's memory efficient and very fast. And it's great because you can do it with absolutely anything. Not just circle, not just like a rounded rectangle, but you can also do it with fonts. You can also do it with the arrow I defined previously. So it's incredibly flexible. So the instance of paint can also take in color filters as well. And this is really useful for changing the color of your images. You can actually map a color to the non-alpha portions of your bitmap. And this is really handy if you have a design with tons and tons of, maybe if you have like an arrow that's different colors all over your object, like a black and a white and a blue arrow. This is a good way to reduce your APK size, because now you only need one instance and you can just apply a color filter to it, and you don't need to have that duplicated image all over the place. Okay, and that brings us to this, which is that the Canvas API itself, you can actually create an instance of it, and that the instance of that, when you create it, you just pass it a bitmap, And then instead of drawing to the screen, everything you draw is onto a bitmap. So you can do something like this. Bitmap, pass to a canvas, pass that canvas into the onDraw method of your view, and then all of a sudden, wow, now your view is a bitmap. And now you can do lots of fun things with it that you would normally do to a bitmap. Things that you normally couldn't do to a normal view. So one example of that is you can apply a Gaussian blur to it. And this is really useful for things like dialogues if you want the back to kind of fade out. You can also apply color filters. This is another kind of cool effect that I like to use sometimes, where you just drain the saturation out of it. Again, good for kind of drawing the eye away from the background and towards maybe one specific element. And finally, this is actually really good for animations, because instead of having to re-render the view every time an animation ticks, you instead basically just render the view once to a bitmap, and then that's what you're animating. So it's also a very efficient way to animate stuff. So yeah, so I've run out of time. So thank you for listening. And yes, if anyone has any questions. Tell everyone's really curious. Yeah. Yep.
Are you able to set the font type when you're drawing text, or is it set a default font?
Nope. Yeah, there's and it's actually set typeface on the ping object, and you can set the text size. You can even do much more interesting stuff like you can add kerning manually if you'd like, which is something that you can't do on Android, at least not before API 21. Yep. So if you have an application where the text needs to be very specifically laid out, I'd actually recommend using Canvas. You can get a lot more control than you would with the text view. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thanks.